Hey everyone, welcome to the AI Canvas, the podcast that explores the impact of generative AI on businesses, the arts, and our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Foster, co-founder of Applied Data Science Partners and author of the book Generative Deep Learning, Teaching Machines to Paint, Write, Compose, and Play. Now, over the coming weeks, we'll be diving deep into fascinating conversations with a diverse range of thought leaders, including musicians, artists, journalists, educators, marketers, lawyers, and those at the cutting edge of this fascinating field. We'll explore their unique insights into the opportunities and potential threats of deploying this technology across industries and how it's going to reshape our world. We have a fascinating conversation ahead of us, so sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of generative AI right here on the AI Canvas. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the AI Canvas, the podcast where we talk about all things generative AI and in particular its impact on society, jobs, and business. Now today we've got a really exciting guest with us. This is Beth Rose, BBC journalist, and she's going to be talking about the impact of generative AI, particularly on journalism, but also touching on some other subjects such as novel writing and everything to do with the creative process. So a little bit about Beth. Beth is an internationally award-winning BBC journalist who started out in regional reporting 14 years ago. She's since covered some of the biggest stories, including the Hatton Garden robbery. She's produced TV shows at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and also reported from the Paralympics in South Korea. Now, Beth currently specialises in disability and mental health reporting on the BBC podcast and 5 Live show Access All. And she's writing features as well to accompany this, which are often found trending in the top 10 on the BBC News website. So definitely check those out. Outside of work, Beth would describe herself, and this is her words, not mine, as a frustrated yet hopeful writer of fiction, hit and miss violinist, and committed park runner. So Beth, thank you so much for joining us today on the AI Canvas.
Thank you for inviting me on. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Cool. So perhaps let's just start with a bit about you. So you're a BBC journalist. How did you get into journalism? And just tell us a little bit about what you've seen change over those 14 years, starting out as a regional journalist and now, making it up to BBC journalist. What have you seen change and what's kind of been the big things for you that have really stood out over that time?
I suppose in a way, 14 years doesn't actually sound that long a time, but it has changed a lot. But going way back, the way I got into journalism was one of those questions someone asked me that I had an answer for, which I'd never thought about. So I was 9 years old. I was at my friend Eve's house after swimming club, and her grandma just said to me, "When you grow up, what do you want to be?" And I didn't give any time to thinking about it. I just said BBC journalist. And literally that was it. Then I was just on this really straight, narrow path, not an easy path. I mean, there are like rocks and challenges in the way, but that was it. And I never really questioned it again.
It's so funny, isn't it? How like life sometimes happens like that. You just feel like you're on a conveyor belt that this is your path somehow. And when you find it, it's just there, and you're just on it, and that's you kind of, as long as you're happy, then that's what you've got to carry on doing.
I think it certainly made education, all those decisions, a lot easier because, I did the university thing, I did the usual literature thing. And then I started off, you probably don't even know this, but as a sports intern with BBC Sport, all those kind of 14 years ago, and then moved into regional news, which is kind of how it was back then, actually. That's already changed. So generally you'd start as a local reporter. So I worked in Radio Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, and then I moved to News Online, which I love now, but at the time I did not want to go into online. It did not seem the great place to be, and now that's kind of my favoured thing, even though I've done all sorts and I'm in podcasting now. But it has changed hugely. So when I first started, social media was around. We had Twitter and Facebook, so they were used a bit, but generally it was still quite what we'd considered old school now. So people phoning their contacts. We had paper diaries. We'd literally write in what events were coming up or year anniversary markers and things like that. And then rapidly, I think social media was the biggest change, which is kind of fine for me because I was in my early 20s. So I was just using it socially. But I know even now, older journalists kind of struggle to kind of get their head around how to use social media, how to use it for work, when not to trust it, how to promote work on there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other big change actually was with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So me and you are sat both in West London, but in our own places. And prior to COVID, that would not have been an option. Obviously, I would have come to you to the studio. And that's the same with my work. We do a podcast every week. We have, say, 3 to 4 guests. And previously, they would have had to come into the studio, or if we could, put them in a local studio. But now they can just dial in, do their 20 minutes, carry on with the rest of their day. And so actually it's kind of good because we can get the bigger guests at shorter notice because they can just slot in.
Yeah. So going back to that social media thing, what was it specifically, do you think, about that caused such a stir? Is it the real-time nature of that feed, and that it's almost a competitor in many ways to journalism? Because journalism, I presume, and you would say as well, is all about the ability to verify sources, the ability to build trust in the platform that you're reading on that news on, whereas Twitter is the complete antithesis of that. There's no need to verify sources. There's no need to build trust because it's just a dump of information and you take what you want from it. So is it the case that it was seen as almost like a competitor to what you were doing, or was it that journalists needed to find a way to incorporate it into what they were doing themselves to be a better journalist?
I think for a lot of people, it was just like the great unknown. It was this huge juggernaut that like 15 to 25-year-olds were on and seemingly knew how to use. And there was no real instruction manual. So I remember when I first started, within a few years of my job, and someone would ask me, what do I do? And in a way, Twitter was like, well, I can't tell you. You just have to, you have to learn, you have to dive in, which this sort of, AI movement feels a bit like that. It's too difficult to explain, just go and have a play.
Yeah.
And then also you rub up against the old world of journalism where people think you should be going out, meeting contacts, having conversations, and Twitter just serves this stuff up. And as you say, making sure it's correct is half the battle. So any story the BBC does must have 2 sources. So even if something's really, really trending, like I worked on a terrorist attack when I was on the London desk, and we could see the first information coming through was via Twitter. Then someone phoned it in who was saying they were at the site and had witnessed what had happened, but it was so confusing that it was difficult to know if that was true. And then so we had to take time to obviously speak to the Metropolitan Police and those kind of established sources.
Yeah.
So I know people have tripped and fallen around Twitter, especially because it's so easy to do. I mean, I have myself. So years ago, there was, we had like Heathrow, I think strikes at Heathrow, and there were huge queues for people to get through, and people were posting all these images. And there was this really compelling image of a departure hall just absolutely packed. And I was like, great, we'll use this. And then, actually it was from like 2 years previously, and the whole team had to go on a course about verifying images and everything like that. So it's easily done.
Well, I mean, this is a perfect segue into what we're here to discuss, which is the generative AI aspect of tech now. And I think, the things that you've mentioned there around verification of sources, images that might not be from the current time, at least you knew that was an image of an actual airport with actual people in.
True.
Now there is, of course, this added dimension that the image itself may not even be, it may never have existed at all. And so there's another dimension that is coming, and perhaps is already here actually in many respects, which is that it's not just about verification of the image and whether that image exists at all, but it's can you now say with actual authenticity that what you're looking at is indeed real at all and has ever been real? Have you seen anything sort of recently that's really caught your attention around that, where you're like, oh, actually, I wasn't able to pick this as being real or not real immediately, and I had to actually really look carefully, or in fact, I'm still, being fooled by some of these images? I mean, I've seen stuff on the BBC website where they put you to the test and say, can you tell which of these images is real? So yeah, would you say this wave is already here, or is it something you're worried about in the future?
I'd say it's something I'm more worried about. It's probably something that I should be more tuned into and be actively aware of. I mean, I guess my personal job, I tend to go to the sources for the images, so there's some assurances there. But I've definitely been caught out. I mean, the most obvious one is the Pope in his white puffer jacket, which I just happened to, I don't know, I was scrolling, or I caught it out the corner of my eye on TV and thought, that's just really odd, and didn't think anything more of it, because why wouldn't he necessarily have a puffer jacket? Who knows? And then obviously subsequently, you know, all the headlines come out about it being an AI creation. And then I did read a really great article, maybe in Le Monde, I think, about how to spot currently actually images that are kind of faked or created, in the sense that generative AI isn't great at human anatomy. Correct. So actually, like, looking at the hands, which is now really useful. And now I've seen more images, and you can see the hands are, you know, a bit odd. 3 hands, or 3 fingers, or 6 fingers.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was another one actually, which probably caught me out more because I wasn't expecting it, which was a piece about a photography competition. I think it was kind of portraits on a certain theme. And the winning image was sort of 2 women embracing different generations. And there was something about the image that just didn't sit right. I didn't know if it was the perspective or the dimensions or the angles, or there was something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I just knew it was a really odd photograph, and I didn't know why it had won. And then it turned out it's because it had been sort of seen as this creative stream, and it was a faked image.
Yeah, so they'd chosen it as the best image, and yet it was AI generated. And I believe in that example as well, even the artist knew that they were submitting something that was against the rules, but they wanted to test the boundaries. So in a way, it sort of became a piece of art in its own right because of that. And
exactly.
That's a really interesting use case. And just on the flip side of that, I read the other day one, I don't know if you saw the one where a lady had submitted a photo to a photography competition, exactly the same. And the judges assessed it to be AI generated, so disqualified it. And yet it wasn't. And it won the competition. They said it was the best piece of photography in the whole thing, but they were going to disqualify it because of the fact that it was AI generated. And yet she then was able to show them lots of other photos from the same day of her son. I think it was with 2 mannequins in a room. And again, there was something a little bit sort of off about the image, but that's what made it special. And she was so proud of the image and submitted it. So it just goes to show that, you know, it's very easy to sort of say, well, we're just going to dismiss AI imagery, but then how can you be sure? And if it's fooling people, then you can't. And would you say the same sort of applies to text as well? Maybe that's more in lines with, you know, your line of work as a journalist as well. The ability to read something and know that it's been human written must be so important to you as someone who's researching.
I think so, because it's all about creativity, isn't it? You know, I've had this kind of recently. We've had, you know, it's the summer, so you get different interns coming through, you know, from like 18 to say 24, and you know, you set them on a research task, and their version of research is kind of copying and pasting stuff across. And part of me is like, well, that's the quickest way. What's the point of them rewriting it? But then the journalist and writer within me is like, well, you should give it added value. You should, you know, write it in the best way. So that's one element. Text-wise, I feel, I don't know for sure, but I feel like it would lack something. It would be a bit kind of homogenized. We'd start to see the same old patterns. But I did get sucked in on Facebook not too long ago. So, as you know, I'm a big fan of TV programs like Married at First Sight. And I was watching the latest Australian season. I was quite way behind everyone else. And there was a headline about 2 people in the competition who had married other people. You might need to go and research how this show works, but I'm just going to shortcut and tell you this bit. And I saw this article which basically suggested these 2 people in separate relationships had got together after the show, and it was really tantalizing. And I opened it and I read the piece, and there was literally nothing of interest in there. Like, the headline didn't bear resemblance to the content. There was nothing new. It was just like shmush of info. And then right at the end, it said this article has been written by AI. And I felt like I'd been tricked at that point. But it also kind of suggested to me that maybe you can tell, because it'll be lacking kind of descriptive flourish or new information, because obviously it's just been scraping from other
Yeah.
places.
But this gets right to the heart of the matter, I think, because you as a journalist did your research, you looked at the article, you got to the bottom, realized it was AI generated. There was red flags before that anyway. But the problem, I think, is that most people don't do that. They'll just see the headline and then retweet it. And then that just creates this chain reaction of misinformation whereby suddenly truth doesn't matter. It's all about the headline. Is it attention grabbing? Does it make you look as if you're on the pulse as somebody on Twitter? And that's the danger, is that we lose the ability as a society to care about truth and actually to value sensationalism, which has always been the tabloid, I guess, approach to selling papers or getting readers, getting listeners. And that just runs away with itself, because as soon as you live in a world where truth is something that you can effectively conjure up and create and manufacture to look very, very real, but actually is still, a complete fabrication. You're in this post-truth world, aren't you? Of what are we even doing here? Do we care about what's actually happening, or do we just want to grab the latest viral trend? So yeah, does the BBC kind of have guidelines around this, around their approach to generative AI? Have you heard people talking about it internally, and like, should you use ChatGPT to produce an article? What's your sort of...
So at the moment, I believe the kind of sort of the specialists in this area at the BBC, they are looking at guidelines, and I know some of them are on external boards or with organizations to see kind of where this is going. Internally, I feel like guidelines are often quite slow, and journalists in general, certainly when you're talking about kind of mass daily news journalists, can be a bit skeptical and a bit worried about change. We all hate change, and things are changing all the time. So this is one area we don't want to think about. People are definitely playing with it, but as far as I'm aware, not for programs without flagging it up. So I did produce an episode on Chat GPT because it's claimed to be disabled. So obviously my specialism is disability and mental health. And it said it couldn't do a capture grid because it was visually impaired, and told a human this. So we did a whole story around, this. And as part of that, we asked for its right of reply, which was quite just fun. And it said it just was using the most common excuse. And then I thought, I need to write the intro to this script, which is pretty formulaic every week, who the presenters are, where they are, what topic is coming up. So I just like jotted it into the chatbot, hit return, and then fairly reasonable script came back. Just that top bit, but it was, you wouldn't necessarily known if I'd written it or
exactly,
or the chatbot had. And I guess
you checked it as well, right? I mean, afterwards you didn't just run with it; you checked it to
exactly. And I think that's kind of my worry, that potentially it's a brilliant resource, but once we move there, humans are just kind of really lazy, and once we go there, will we return to being accurate? It's a really quick shortcut. Maybe it'll work most of the time. Can you get away with it? In my mind, it's a bit like pasta sauce. Like you used to make pasta sauce. Now you just buy it in a jar.
Yeah.
And you're like, how do you make pasta sauce now? And that's changed in like 15 years or less. I don't know. I don't know when pasta sauce became big, but I've certainly probably never made it myself.
Exactly. When you got Dolmio, why bother? Yeah. Other sources are available, but
exactly.
That's a really nice analogy. I think this like it's about speed and automation, but also, I guess you're sort of, anyone who knows what they're doing would be constantly tasting this as they're going through, and not just saying, well, I'm just going to dump it in and hope for the best, but it still has to look and feel like real pasta sauce that you would make. And if it's as almost as good, that's probably good enough these days. And I think that's probably the danger, isn't it, that if we always aim for 90%, that we just degrade to zero quite quickly. Because if next year content is 90% as good as it was last year, but people don't care because they don't notice the difference really, then 20 years down the line, we're all just reading AI generated scripts. There's nothing of interest anymore, no personal opinion. And this, I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about like your thoughts on, I guess, the benefit versus problem dichotomy that we've got between these two quite extreme views of generative AI. On the one hand, you've got, this is going to change the world because we can automate things that used to take us like hours and hours to do. Now we can just bash them out and they're good enough. And then the other side, which is, children growing up in this education system aren't learning to think, like your interns that you talked about, that they really putting the effort in to think and process this information. Where would you sit on the spectrum of optimism to pessimism, would you say?
I think largely on the fence, but maybe leading to pessimism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really worried it will erode thinking, as you mentioned, and kind of originality. In some ways, it is going to be good because journalism, in some aspects, can take ages. So if you've got something that can do your briefs or do your research reasonably quickly, then I can spend longer going deeper into government records or speaking to sources and getting those things together. So sometimes using kind of this technology is going to free up the humans, which is really good. And actually, I hadn't realized that I had been telling everyone about this wonderful technology, which is saving me hours of time each week. And I hadn't even considered it was AI, which is the fact that, when I do an interview or a chat with you like this, and I need the quotes for a piece, well, I just run it through a transcript website, and within like 10 minutes, I'll have an hour and 20 minutes worth of audio just there. Yep. It's not brilliant. It's not, 100%, but it's saved me, I don't know, 3 hours or something. Yeah. It takes such a long time to transcribe. And I'm always telling people to use these systems. So from that respect, I'm already using it. I think it's brilliant. It saves me loads of time. I do think it will erode some creativity, but maybe we'll think about how to be creative in different ways. And then also from bits I've been reading, and you will know more than I, but it seems like a lot of this is done in English language. And so then you kind of get into the realms of, well, how much equality is there in this? Are countries or newsrooms going to be left behind? Does then that produce new biases and things like that, which is something I'm only beginning to think about. You kind of need that sort of rich tapestry. And if everyone's shortcutting it, but smaller countries can't do that, then we're beginning to lose their experiences, their stories, their worries as well.
It's a really good point. I think when you look at how these things are trained, it's all just trained on human data. So if we've got a proliferation at the moment of English-speaking data out on the web, and including things like code, which is all obviously written in English, and everything else in the news is pretty much certainly even regional channels would probably translate a lot of their content into English anyway. So even if it is a French website, there's probably an English equivalent of it anyway because they want to reach a wide audience or whatever it might be. Then you're going to, of course, have a model which is much, much better at English, even if there are certainly models these days that do attempt to do other languages as well. And ChatGPT, would also be able to give back French, German, or other common languages, but perhaps not some of the very niche dialects that would be spoken in regional news. But you're right to say that the biases are something that I think a lot of people are worried about, and that there isn't an obvious solution to them either. So and I suppose that's something that, as a journalist, you would always be worried, especially a journalist who's reporting on disability, mental health, to be trying to, as much as possible, negate some of these societal biases. But again, doesn't it come back to the fact that do people, if it's so easy, then it's so tempting to just think, well, I'm just going to use it and hope for the best. And that's what we need to avoid.
Yeah. That's the biggest worry, I think. I feel like we're all standing around Pandora's box, fiddling with the bow at the moment, and that is the worry, that once you go there, why would you go back?
Yeah,
and then you easily forget all the things that maybe it's taken away, and on we go.
Yeah, and maybe let's just talk briefly about your authoring as well, because I know you've written a novel. And
not published, better put
not
that
published, but written a novel is an absolutely incredible achievement that I wish I'd have under my my hat. But that's amazing. Could you just tell us a little bit about? I mean, obviously you wrote this novel way before ChatGPT, and seeing this all now, do you think to yourself as an author, I wish I'd have waited a few years because now I could have just used this, and at least then I'd have all of those like mundane sections that you just think, oh, I've got to get this bit written, but it's not the most exciting bit that I need to write. I could use it for. Or do you think to yourself, actually, I'm so glad that I did write it before ChatGPT because at least I didn't have the temptation, or also I've written a truly original book that I wouldn't have done with
with these tools available?
So this is kind of what I'm wrestling with right now. So I hadn't really even conflated the two, say a couple of months ago. You know, creative writing, you just sit there in the coffee shop for hours trying to find inspiration and just writing whatever down. And I've got a very good friend who I work with who I was in a meeting a few weeks ago, and he just texted me saying, OMG, like caps, OMG. And I was like, this is quite unusual language for him. And I was like, what's going on? And he has been struggling. So he's a journalist. Every journalist has like 19 bestsellers in them, so they think. But he could never actually sit down and write it. He got too scared by the blank page or committing himself to 100,000 words on an idea that he wasn't 100% set on. So he's keeps buying books on how to write, reads them, never writes. And then he sent this, oh my God, text. And he had this idea. He put it into Chat GPT. It was probably maybe like 60 words long, his sort of general idea. And he said, write me a beat sheet. So books have different beats to hit, high, low points, in the style of Save the Cat, which is a particular type of beat sheet about this topic. He hit return, and then there was a structure. And he went back and forth with it. It was almost like Messenger from the 2000s. He kept saying, oh, I like this bit about James, but I don't like that bit about Lily. Can you rehash? Can you make her this? And he's created this story. And yesterday when I was having a play around, another friend was texting me about some scales, and I was eating a cereal bar, and I thought, oh, I'll just put in a line about write me a story about Jack and Jennifer who meet at a weight loss camp, and give me a 15-point beat sheet. And like before I'd finished the cereal bar, I had pretty good structure. And before I did it myself, I was thinking, I'm not sure. I mean, you're meant to be creative and original, but having done it myself, I would probably have got to the same conclusions, but it would have taken me weeks. But I do feel I'm on that cusp, and that when I make that leap, there's no going back. And will I really feel like a writer? I don't think I will. So I think I'm going to continue the traditional way. But that's not to say that like 50% of the market will use ChatGPT to great success.
Definitely, especially when it, you know, could you describe maybe this beat sheet and Save the Cat and a bit just for listeners and myself as well? What does that output look like, and how structured is it? Like, could you give us an example of something?
So, Save the Cat is it's the idea that for you to kind of fall in love with a character or to like a character, they have to do something good. So you see them in good light. So maybe save a cat from the tree. If you've got a male character and he's a fireman or something, it's kind of that basic. And a beat sheet is sort of 15 points that most books or films, because I think it started with screenwriting, have to hit. So the first point is an opening image. So you want to see someone in their everyday life. They're going to work. They've got a wife at home. They've got 2 children. And then slowly it builds. So you have then the inciting incident. So something happens to change that equilibrium. And it moves through until you've got like the midpoint where some good things happening or some bad things, right to the end. And one of the closing points is the chase. So if you watch rom-coms or even like action films, near the end, there's normally like a race against time, or you've literally got to get to the airport to stop someone getting on the plane. And then the conclusion. So it basically is not foolproof because it can go awry, but a fairly safe structure to follow so that you know your story hits the high and low points that your reader is really expecting, even if they don't know they're expecting kind of those points.
And how does that make you feel as a writer, that an AI can do a very good job of this, when the premise of being a writer is that should be difficult, and that should be, to do that really well and to have a beat sheet that you can be like, this is a best-selling novel beat sheet, you know, this is something that's going to grab the reader's attention. How does it make you feel as a writer? Do you feel sort of encouraged by it and sort of enthused, or I'm getting the feeling that you're feeling almost like it's a cheat and that it makes you feel...
I do feel a little bit, but I can also see the benefit. So with my friend, he needed that assurance that what he was writing did fit a traditional structure, which just gives you that kind of validation just to pursue. So I can see that, and I wonder actually if it helps you arrange all your thoughts. So when I'm giving writing a second go, so the novel I'm writing at the moment has lots of different events that happen to this character, and it's difficult to know which event should come first.
Yeah.
And so maybe using ChatGPT might help with that. So I am tempted to play with it with a structure, but almost to see what it would come up with. My other kind of reservation is I hope this friend never sees this interview, because I don't think he'll forgive me. But he also asked it to come up with a backstory for one of his characters. So he just put in a few details, like she was 16, she was moving to a different boarding school in a different part of the country. Give me a backstory. And it gave her, like, ChatGPT gave this really amazing backstory. It was like really interesting. She lived near the seaside. Her parents owned a bakery. They were worried about her move. It was really, really compelling and sounded really good. But then I kind of caught myself and remembered it's actually really difficult to inhabit someone else's ideas. So I don't know if you have this in your line of work, but when I'm at work and someone says, we need a feature on schizophrenia, can you do it on this angle? It's kind of a bit of a trudgery to do it, because I've not come up with that idea, and I've somehow got to get in someone else's idea, and I don't really know how to move around in that. Whereas when I come up with it myself, I know exactly who I want to talk to, what it's going to look like. So I think there are limitations there, because it's not your story. You don't really know how to own it or live in it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that. That it's like having this constant assistant, which is just giving you, it just A, making you feel a bit stupid that you couldn't come up with it yourself, and then B, sort of like saying, well, there you go, can you run with it now? And then you go, no, not really, because it's not my idea. And then it makes you feel even worse, because then you're just leaning more and more on the AI to kind of come up with the ideas. And I suppose it comes back to this point, isn't it, which is part of doing these things is the journey itself to get there. And that if you just go straight to the destination of there's your beat sheet, you haven't been through that mental process of discarding ideas as well as accepting the ones that it's given you. So do you think that as a writer yourself, do you gain something from the mistakes, presumably, as well? When you've done something wrong, that you learn something from that?
Yeah, you definitely learn something. Sometimes you'll go 2 years and remember something you discarded, and actually it's now perfect for that story or for another story, or it will send you on a different journey. So actually it's all quite useful. And I mean, when you're starting out writing, it's like a massive learning process. You have to kind of go down all the wrong pathways and create too many characters and complicated situations to kind of really learn how to actually write something coherent and engaging. And it does feel like a bit of a shortcut. I'm almost, I'd be interested to see it, because you want that structure as a writer. You do want that assurance. But I do worry that eventually it could lead to even more homogenization of genres.
I wonder if we'll be able to protect it. As a reader, you'll be like, this writer's used 80% of their time in ChatGPT, or another one's just dabbled with it, and you can sense the structure of it. But actually, there's a lot of personal experience of that writer. Maybe we'll get a sixth sense of it.
Maybe. And also, I don't know what happens with the byline. Is it like Beth Rose and chatbot GPT, or is it GPT with some help? Like writers like James Patterson. He writes, I don't know how many books he puts out a year, say 2 or 3. And basically he comes up with his own beat sheet, and then he'll work with another writer who will do the slog.
Really?
And it'll be James Patterson in like big letters on the front of his book, and then like maybe even inside the cover, Dave Foster or something.
Yeah, because that's the brand you're buying.
So maybe he's actually the perfect person to kind of look at, and that's where we're going to go.
Well, okay, so this is it, isn't it? This is the thing. Do we care as a reader how the thing has been produced, or do we just care about the art itself?
That is a good question. Right. I think it even comes down to like pseudonyms. Like when you read Robert Galbraith, who for years was just a really popular crime writer, and then it turned out it was J.K. Rowling. Like, we didn't really care when we were reading about the crime writing. Yeah, there was some chatter about who it actually was, but it was kind of the story that was the important thing. And then it just so happened to be like the biggest author in the world, so that flipped it on its head. So I think most readers probably wouldn't care if it was a good story. and
Yeah,
it will
we
just
wouldn't.
be the artists themselves or the people trying to make money. Like in America, we've obviously got the screenwriters strike,
Mhm.
which in part is about AI being used to come up with ideas, script write, do everything like that. So,
Mhm.
so obviously there's huge worries if you are a professional writer.
Yeah, I'm sort of imagining a future world where I open a novel which has been 100% written by AI and not caring, and I'm trying to imagine that world. I don't know if I can put myself in that position, but then that might be because I'm old. You start to think to yourself, is this just because I've experienced a world up until this point where I can
Mm,
pick up a book and sort of imagine the author writing it, and that children won't have that necessarily because they just won't have grown up in a world where things are human created all the time, and therefore
wow.
it won't be a big deal for them. They'll just be like, yeah, AI, human, whatever, as long as the
I mean,
stories don't care.
I, I guess in a way, like if you were going on a holiday and the night before you could write your ideal beach read,
Yeah,
maybe there's like a drop down menu, you can choose
yeah,
like romance or horror and literally have a bespoke book. Maybe you wouldn't
yeah,
care.
right. I mean, that's the future that we're being told is happening, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, exactly. So instead of pouring through Goodreads or WH Smith, or going to your local bookshop and trying to find the book and probably not finding one, and then ending up just scrolling through your phone on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think what most people end up doing when they're looking for a nice, beach read or whatever, that they can have something generated for them that's got exactly the right amount of intrigue, the right amount of adventure, the right amount of romance for them. And I mean, even you could even produce one which kind of evolves, I guess, as you're reading it. You can tell it
I
how
mean,
you
there's
want the story
something
to go.
kind of appealing about it. You're saying all that, and I'm like, yeah, actually, I kind of know what sort of book I'd like, and
Yeah,
it will save me 8 years from writing it.
yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
then I mean, the segue that we could take here is into things like copyright, and authors who have spent all of this time
mm,
upskilling themselves in their craft, becoming the best possible writer they can, pouring hours into learning how to write well, and then finding that their work is now ingested into Chat GPT, which is blending it with a bit of Stephen King, a bit of Patterson, a bit of J.K. Rowling, and just coming up with a new book. Does that make you feel as a writer slightly threatened as well, or do you think it's just the way the world is, and maybe other humans would read your book one day on the shelf and think, actually, I'm going to take a bit of Beth Rose's writing and adopt it into my own style, and
it
it's
does
cheaper.
sound like some kind of horrible soup to keep going with the like food analogies. Now we're kind of at the precipice where we can still see the original stuff and then a bit of Stephen King. Like my friend's book, um, ChatGPT came up with the names James and Lily, which is two of the characters in Harry Potter. So you're like, well, I wonder where it got those most popular names from. Um, yeah, no, it's a bit horrifying that it all would just get melded down into nothing. But then, humans move on, humans recreate things. So maybe we'd just move into a new realm, and all us writers with all these aspirations to sit in our garret and write, the great British novel or whatever,
Yeah,
will just be seen as kind of like old fuddy-duddies and like,
yeah,
come
yeah,
on, we can make, I don't know, 5-dimensional novels just using this computer, which is way more exciting than your traditional
mm.
just written stuff.
I think there's two ways you could take it, isn't there? You could up the value of human creation could suddenly increase massively because it's a novelty to be able to have these skills. And so if you're reading a novel, it might one day be sort of seen as a bit quirky to read a novel that's been written by a human. Maybe we'll be in that world, which sounds dystopian and horrible. But also we might sort of come down the path of saying, well, we're all a bit bored by AI stuff. And like you say, it's all a bit homogenous. And maybe it can't extrapolate either. Maybe we end up finding that AI is good for writing a bland novel for an average Tuesday read, but it's not going to be able to write the next Harry Potter. And this is what I wonder, actually, and I sort of gain hope from, is that humans have this ability to push the boundaries of what's been done before. And I haven't seen anything really with AI that has been truly extrapolative and has taken a completely new direction, because that's just not what it's been trained to do. And like when you're just predicting the next word, which is all it does effectively, it predicts the next word given everything that's come before. it's no wonder that it can't really push on something really extremely novel and exciting. So yeah, what do you think? Like, do you think AI could ever have written the entire 7-book series of Harry Potter, or is that just a step too far?
I think with enough like prodding from a human, so this idea that you can keep going back to it almost like a conversation and say, can you make this bit scarier, can you make this character funnier, you might be able to get there. But also I'm like really aware that we're in August 2023 and like there's been a massive boom, or certainly in my mind a massive boom in all of this happening in less than a year to kind of when it came into my consciousness, really. And then in 2025, like who knows what that looks like. So I think it's more trying to predict where we're going to go. And I don't really know what that means, but it just seems to be gaining momentum, really, and improving. Like it's even improving more quickly than the experts thought it would,
100%.
which is a bit scary. I mean, maybe it's great in many respects, but also it is a bit scary kind of from like, as I keep saying, the everyman journalist or everyman writer, or someone where AI was this kind of sci-fi thing that you'd see like in the latest Mission Impossible film, and now actually it's like it's right in my flat right now.
Yeah,
basically.
Exactly, and you're right to say it's certainly progressed faster than we all thought possible. And ChatGPT was the trigger, I think, for it to hit the public eye, and suddenly everyone was very aware that this thing existed, and it's all front of mind at the moment, isn't it? It's all, is this AI? Is this not AI? Can we trust it? Misinformation. And I wonder if it will blend into the background a bit more as we go forward, in that we won't notice we're using it, just like you said just now about the transcription service. I think, kids watching a YouTube video about a topic will not now feel that they perhaps need to watch the whole video. They can just get a transcription, get it summarized, and just have a paragraph ready for them that's never been written before, just for them, in their language, in their style, explaining it in their perfect, their way that suits their learning style the best. So, yeah, I mean, who knows what the future leads to, but I think you're right to say that it's certainly progressing at an increasingly rapid pace. I wanted to ask you a question as well about, your specialism, which is disability mental health. What do you think the impact of AI, particularly with ChatGPT, might be on people's mental health? Because do you think we're ready to live in a world where AI exists and that there is this other being that is better at us than us at so many things, makes us feel a bit useless?
That's a really good question.
Or are we not?
I think it will potentially exacerbate mental health. A lot of mental health challenges come from the difficulties you face in everyday life. So maybe you haven't got a job, or maybe you're not happy in your job, or you're losing out on jobs because of AI, that stress, money problems, self-worth. What do you study to get good jobs? And obviously that's just going to exacerbate people's general anxieties and worries. And I think people, you get some really, really big thinkers who will get stressed or unwell over thinking of where this could go. But equally, in terms of kind of accessibility and sort of the disability land or sphere, it's actually really exciting. There are lots of good work going on that can really help and support people. There's a new app coming out, I think, called Be My Eyes, or maybe that was the previous iteration. And it's, I've got lots of friends who are blind who are really excited about this, because it means they can open their fridge if they're at home on their own, wave their camera in front of the fridge, and it will say, on the top shelf you've got tomatoes, it will go through. So that actually is going to save them a lot of time and a lot of stress, rather than kind of feeling what they've got, trying to assemble dinner. It's all there. So in many ways, actually, it's a really exciting time if you're disabled and you're wanting a more straightforward life, just like as everyone else. But I think it will. I haven't thought through the mental health question. No one's mentioned it, but I think that's a really good point. I think it potentially will exacerbate because of all the impact it will have on all of our lives that we've maybe not thought about just yet.
And you perhaps started to see it with social media, where it's proliferation of information, being constantly aware of the news, not being able to escape your other people's realities as well, and having other people's realities presented to you as fact, and it's actually their opinion, or all these sort of things. And I think a lot of people would say the biggest risk of what we're building here is the proliferation of misinformation, and that is something I think that mental health doesn't particularly sit well with.
And also, going back to journalism, we've seen a few examples of kind of this misinformation being printed. So there was it's an American academic called Jonathan Turley, who actually works in public law. Mm-hmm. And I think he was just kind of, I think he put his name into chat GPT or something to see what it came up with. Mm. And it came up with this article, which looked like an article, saying he had been accused of sexual harassment. But it happened on a trip he'd never been on, conducted by a university a faculty he'd never worked for. Mm. It had got alleged statements and quotes from papers that had never existed. Mm. And then another chatbot kind of rehashed it, saying this was fact, and none of it existed.
Yeah.
And he's someone who's, he's in the right circles. He knows, he's a professor. He knows how to contact the New York Times, Washington Post, put his side of the story across. But if you're not in that circle and your name has been associated with something like that, then that's like life-changing and ruinous in so many respects. So if you're unlucky to even share a name with someone and it's just proliferating this information again and again and again, and there's no author to go back to correct it, then you as a human are kind of under this massive amount of weight. Like, how do you ever correct that?
Yeah, I know. And there's stories like that make you think there might be a tipping point where if we live in a world without AI, generative AI, and everything you can read is at least written by a human, even if it's misinformation, someone's actually had to go to the effort of type that up and the nefarious purposes or whatever, or their own, pushing their own agenda. And then we'll move through this stage where more and more of the content is generated by AI and might be hallucinatory, even if it's not nefarious. Yeah. It's still, it's gone off the rails, if you like, and said something that's not true. And that will cause damage to those that it certainly does those things against. But then if you push that even further to the point where everything is AI generated, again, it almost doesn't become a problem again, because people will be so aware that what they're reading is probably on the large, on the whole, incorrect, and that they need to put the effort in to work out what's real or not. Then it's only when you hit this sort of middle threshold where it's affecting a small enough group of people that people don't have the internal skills to be able to question it, and they just think, well, it must have been written by a human, so it must be true. And we'll probably have to go through that, awful period of having things like Twitter not flooded, but just there's a sprinkle of misinformation there that you can't really spot because it's maybe 5% of everything out there. So I just wonder if it will end up being something that we'll realize after a while, just, is something that we just can't have. If we're going to have social media, you just can't have this. You can't have AI and social media. You have one or the other. It's either a human-based social media platform or AI-generated stuff that we all know is probably fictional, or at least is creative. It's bending the truth a lot.
That's a really interesting point, actually. I wonder if as humans and as competitive humans, we could ever say we can have one or the other and we need to choose, because you obviously have competitors on both sides. But I think maybe next year is going to be a really good or a telling time, because it's the US presidential elections.
Right.
Obviously, the last one's, a few years ago, but there was huge amounts of misinformation even back then. I think that was kind of the time when deep fake videos were sort of around and about. And now obviously they've come on leaps and bounds, and obviously being on a global platform, I think all eyes will obviously be on it, but maybe they'll have this additional angle of how is AI playing into this. I don't know, for like this average journalist, it does feel like some kind of tidal wave coming towards us, and no one really knows what to do, whether to like dive into it or run away. It's like a huge amount of the unknown, really.
Yeah, and I think many people would say until that wave breaks, we won't be able to do anything about it. We're terrible at preparing as humans, as a society. Yeah. We've generally always let something awful happen and then done something about it after the fact. It's never been the case that we're able to say, we can see this wave coming and we're actually going to put the defenses up before it happens. we just seem incapable, I think, as a species to be able to do that. Whether that's, atomic weaponry, and we had to have Hiroshima happen before, there was safeguarding against something like this.
I was just going to say that, obviously, at the moment, one of the names on everyone's lips is Oppenheimer. Mm-hmm. And, obviously it's a really complicated scenario, but in essence, it was physicists who wanted to push forward and see what they could do and achieve, but then used for atrocious acts. And I think they themselves, speaking for all these scientists, didn't put those two things together when they were doing it. And then, as you say, the tidal wave breaks and the whole landscape's changed.
Yeah. And I wonder if, I always wonder if we can make that parallel directly, because in a nuclear bomb, there's such a clear link between that weapon and the destruction that could be caused. Whereas I think AI, it's a lot blurrier. There's positives as well, whereas a nuclear weapon has there's nothing good can come out of that. It's a deterrent at best, but even then it's, a terrible way of keeping the peace. So, with AI, I think the real thing people are grappling with is, look at all this good that can happen as a result of this technology. Scientific progress can happen so much faster. Human efficiency can become so much greater. It's a massive boost for economies potentially. But on the other side, there's this dark side to it that you've touched upon, today. Whether that's misinformation, whether it's the mental health crisis that seems to be upon us at the moment that this is going to exacerbate. So I wonder if could you maybe just summarize, if you were to sort of say in 20 years time, the world that you would, maybe let's say 10 years time, let's keep it fairly short. As a journalist, if you were still a journalist in 10 years time, maybe an author, what world would you like to see being built? What sort of structures to be put in place that prevent all of those bad things happening, but still manage to keep all of these benefits that we talked about today?
Wow. In terms of journalism, that is a massive question.
Yeah, it's a huge question.
Well, hopefully, and I imagine this will happen in, say, the next 12 months. Well, there will be kind of editorial guidelines that all journalists will follow, which will hopefully, I suspect, still maintain that you need two sources to verify a story. That research and contacts have to be made, so you have your sources. So basically, the traditions of journalism have to be maintained. But I suspect we will lean on AI even more because, writing briefs on people do take time. If you do a really good brief on someone, you have to, I don't know, read all sorts of other articles. Maybe if they've written a book, read a portion of the book, all of this stuff. So if AI can do it much more quickly, and then I, as a journalist, it's my responsibility to go back and second check everything, then that will free up people to then go further into sort of the journalism. So it will definitely be used. And in terms of social media, to promote our content, we still use social media a lot because I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of people, especially young people, get their news and information from TikTok, especially at the moment, from Instagram. But that actually takes a really long time. And, maybe if I've written an article and then I want it to be an Instagram post, maybe I could rely on AI to write a pithier version that will sell on Instagram, or maybe it will come up with or suggest how I can do a video on TikTok.
Yeah.
So I guess we would work as collaborators is what I'm kind of thinking might happen. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the transcripts is an amazing service that I hadn't really considered to be AI at the time, but obviously is, which is a huge help and does free me up to, write something much more quickly and get it out there. So yeah, I think I'm looking forward to some editorial guidelines, definitely.
Yeah. And I think what you said there about collaboration is the way I'd think of it as well, which is that we need to find this line, don't we, between handing everything that we do over to AI, which is clearly not the world that we want to live in. Nobody wants to read an opinion piece of an AI, I think, would be my hunch, because it's not. The reason we read that opinion piece is because it's coming from someone who's lived our experience and had our, they've been a child, they've grown up, they've seen the world, they've made their own thoughts and opinions, and it's interesting to see what someone else would say about, even if their views differ to ours, that's interesting. Whereas AI's never had that. It's always, it's just come into existence, and So there's nothing, it's all groundless what it's saying. It's not based in any lived experience. It's kind of had the experience of every human that's ever written anything in one homogenous blob.
I think that was on one of the signs on the picket line in Hollywood, that AI has never dealt with childhood trauma. Because obviously, you know, writers sort of go into the depths of their souls to create their work. And yeah, as you say, like AI's kind of got the experience of everyone and no one, just to put it out there.
And also the experience of what you want it to have the experience in. If you tell it, could you come at this from the perspective of somebody who's had that childhood trauma, or somebody who's come at it from the perspective of, you know, a billionaire who's just writing about their like lived experience? It can do that, but it's all hollow. It's not real. It's just a proxy for that thing that you want it to be. So yeah, and I think people will find that very, very, kind of saccharine and a little bit sort of like, this isn't the real thing that I'm sort of looking at here. It's all just, you know, hollowed out. And
yeah, I think hollow is a really good word. And actually, it reminds me, when I was learning to drive, kind of when I was 18 or 19, my driving instructor said to me, you need to be in control of the car cannot be in control of you. And I think this is kind of where we are. Like we need to be the ones telling AI what to do or what it can do, not just like walking along handing it whatever it wants until it kind of grows and grows and grows.
Yeah, for sure. But on the flip side, of course, all of these positives that can come out of it, like the efficiency gains, and I find myself using it more and more actually for our line of work in coding, and the ability to summarize information quickly. It makes you realize, I think, a lot of what we constitute as work these days is just summarization or expansion of information and translation from information from one thing to another thing, whether it's a presentation into a report, or a report into a short email to explain to somebody. And so maybe if it can take away all of that sort of human grunt work that we've...
But then I quite like that sometimes. Don't you find, you know, like I'm in quite a creative industry or like a thinking industry sometimes. And occasionally I just want a really easy, basic job like transcribing, where I don't have to really think.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives me the peaks and troughs of a working day, where I can then, you know, work really hard for 1 hour and get something really original out of it. And then I can do something more simple, like transferring info across.
And it's maybe that downtime where your brain's thinking about other more complex things in your subconscious, so you're not working on the complex things.
And then stuff's just kind of ticking over in the background. So I quite like the grunt work.
Do you think maybe one day, you know, like we've got gyms now for people because no one really does any physical labour, and that the people have to go to the gym to get themselves physically healthy because they're sitting at desks all day? Maybe there'll be mental gyms in future.
Like a library, maybe.
Like libraries are going to come back in.
Or a museum.
Close them all down, but they're coming back. Yeah, maybe that will be the case, that people will feel like they need that sort of stimulation on, I don't know, like these tasks that you describe, which are just satisfying, somewhat repetitive, but also, you know, still require a bit of thought, but ultimately, you know, maybe like groups where people meet up and just talk about stuff without AI in the room.
I can see it happening now you've mentioned it completely. You know, people there'll be like lectures, or maybe I know you're obviously big into your chess and have your chess league, but maybe there'll be more kind of board game leagues and like analog sports almost.
I think we're already seeing that, aren't we, with a lot of especially after COVID, people wanting that physical connection with people, going to events, I mean, we both play in the same orchestra, having that, you know, actual experience, sitting in the room and everyone being together. There's no AI generated music there, although we might be able to from it.
I was going to say they're bringing in the horn section in our orchestra have now gone digital, so their music is now, they've all got iPads.
Oh right, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
On the page, they like,
they've got the foot thingy. What do you call it? Pedal. So they don't even have to do that.
Oh right, okay. Well, there you go. That's stage one to automating our horn section, I think. But yeah, no, that's really interesting. Just to finish up then, we always ask everybody on the podcast, and perhaps we've already sort of touched upon it as well, about, you know, what your vision for the next 10 years is. But yeah, just give us some sort of closing thoughts on everything we've talked about. What would you say? What would you like to learn about, perhaps, around this space that we you're not hearing anyone talk about. What do you think is a really good sort of we're always looking for new topics of conversation for our podcast, and we've talked with journalists, marketers, people in education, people in law, legal. Is there anything that you'd like to sort of hear about on future episodes, maybe of the podcast, that we could touch upon and talk about with others?
Oh, I'd actually be quite interested to hear from like a 19, 20-year-old actually.
That's a really good shout.
Who probably are playing around with it if they're not. I mean, we know loads of them are using it. I know 15-year-olds who are using it in their homework, and kind of what they see the future as being. They've not really thought about any of these qualms, I imagine, because it's there. They use it, makes their homework quicker.
Yeah.
When it comes to exams, I used to use flashcards just to get everything in short-term memory, basically. But maybe Chat GPT is going to change that, the way kind of revision and all of that sort of stuff happens. I think that would be quite interesting. Maybe like the music industry as well. There was the case, wasn't there, where I forget who now, which is going to make this story fall flat, but
is it Drake?
Yeah, Drake. So he did the. I wanted to listen to it, but I think by the time I went to listen to it, they'd kind of retracted it and it had gone.
Yeah.
But I think that's really interesting. I guess the creative spheres, and also actually, this often happens when a story like this kind of gains quick momentum. Everyone presumes knowledge, and so actually I feel like we're often missing the basics. So almost like a back to basic of what it is, how it works, how it can be used in everyday life or in the workplace. Because I think a lot of people kind of are coming to this now, and actually we're quite a way on from the basics.
Yeah. They're really good ideas. The university student one's brilliant. Yeah, we should definitely do that. If you're listening and you are at university, you're going through, a course that requires a lot of written material and exams and coursework as well, get in touch, because we'd love to speak with you about your experiences with using Chat GPT, and where you think it might be useful or detrimental. So yeah. Thanks, Beth. Thanks so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and we've talked about so much stuff. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed it too. Join us next time for the next episode of the AI Canvas. But until then, thanks for listening.